it is fun, as the title of the session suggests, from seed to IPO. Jeff represents the most successful tech IPO of the year and the Forbes cover and a lot of accolades for Entrepreneur of the Year, et cetera. But for entrepreneurs here, to humanize you a little bit, if you will bear with me, I want to start with some of the failures and talk a little bit about the path to get there, because you are a multi-time entrepreneur, and people see the shiny lights and the multi-billion-dollar valuations and things today, but empathetically understanding what a lot of people go through to actually have those successes and realize it's not easy. And it's particularly timely one of your early co-founders actually here with you from one of those other businesses. And so tell us a little bit about startups 1, 2, and 3, but in particular number 1, because there was some pretty painful failure along the way that I think you must have learned from.
Yeah, totally. It's great to be here. And so this is, Twilio's the 4th company that I started. But my very first company, it was during the dot-com days. We were doing lecture notes for college students. And I started it when I was a college student myself in like 97, mostly because there was this brand new thing called the internet. And I wanted to fuck around with it. I wanted to use the internet, and like, what better excuse is there than to start a company and just build something, right, using this new technology. And so we built something. We hired college students to go write lecture notes for the courses they were in, and then we put them online. My favorite part about this story, the year was 1997. We could have had any domain name available, right?
If the reason you wanted. Yep.
We could have had Google, right? Right. We picked notes number 4 free.com. Not great marketers in college, apparently. And so we did this thing. We ended up raising some capital in the early days. We did an angel round while we were still full-time college students, and ended up growing the thing. We started at the University of Michigan, grew it to the Big Ten, basically while we were still in school, and then dropped out of school, raised a venture round, ended up moving the company out to the Bay Area, and selling it to one of our competitors in the space, all within the course of just a few years' time. It was pretty crazy. From the time we actually really got serious about this thing and dropped out of school and we're doing this full time, when we raised a round, we went from pretty much having nothing. We were just kind of screwing around building this thing to raising a seed round. We were $5 million valuation. Then we raised a venture round. I think it was a $30 million valuation. We sold the company. It was a $200 million valuation. And then it was 0 because the company that acquired us got caught in the dot-com crash. And that whole thing happened in the course of 18 months, and it was an insane ride. Funny story, this competitor, we'd always say, we're gonna take those guys down, we're gonna take those guys down. They filed to go public in February of 2000, and were ready to go out, withdrew their filing to acquire us, and then refiled in April of 2000 and missed the window. And they ran full speed into the wall. They were in bankruptcy by August.
Unbelievable.
Crazy, crazy story. And so, it was just a 0, no return for anybody. And just a crazy, crazy wild ride. But it really was my first experience building a company for scale, and thinking about how you would grow a company. It was a nationwide, we went from 1 campus to 7 to 50 to 200 in 4 subsequent semesters. So in the course of 2 years, we basically grew it from 1 campus to 200. We had 10,000 college students working for us at the height. So we had about 200 campuses, 50 courses on every campus, plus a bunch of marketing people too. And we had 10,000 people. Actually, Matt, who's my co-founder from a bunch of my companies, is here today, just happened to be in town. He ran this whole 10,000 person organization that were writing lecture notes. And I remember after it was very clear that this was dead, it ran into the wall and everything had fallen apart. Matt made the observation, great, we built an army of 10,000 stenographers. Now what? And it was yep, we use the internet to do that. But a friend of mine had actually, at that point, just when that was winding down, a friend of mine had written the business plan for StubHub, and it was a pretty good idea, and so they were getting it off the ground, but it was started by 2 folks who come out of the world of banking. So never operated anything. They're more finance guys, and so went and joined up with them to help get StubHub off the ground. And the idea was, provide a marketplace for live event tickets. And I was the CTO, so I hired the initial group of engineers. We built the site, we launched it, and started scaling that up. And the interesting thing about my experience at StubHub, which is like a neat business. I mean, I don't know, like whenever I ask people like who's bought something on StubHub, it's like 90%, of the people.
Okay, show of hands. Who's bought something on StubHub?
You want to hear a funny story? So one time I called up support at StubHub, and because I needed help with a ticket, and they're like, "Something's wrong with my system." I was like, "Well, what's wrong?" She says, "It says your customer ID is number 1." And I said, no, that's accurate. Like I was the first person to sign up for stuff. Like I pushed it to production, and I signed up, and I said, "Hey, it works." So I had customer ID number 1. So we helped get that off the ground, but the interesting thing was I was never all that passionate about live events. Like I didn't go to a lot of concerts, I didn't go to a lot of sporting events, and we're building this site for like live event ticket goers, and what I came to realize during the course of building StubHub was that while it was a great business, I wasn't passionate about what we were building. Like it was just, in my opinion, e-commerce of another thing, right? And that thing happened to be a potentially lucrative business, but when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get through the hard nights, the blood, sweat, and tears that you need to build something, when things aren't going your way, right? You need this raw passion for the product you're building and the customers you're serving. And I didn't have that at StubHub. And so I actually took off. And I didn't stay for the long haul. I spent about, I think it was about a year and a half and helped get that off the ground. And then I was just like, this isn't the right business for me. And
I want to double click on one thing you said there specifically, because I suspect there are a lot of product-oriented founders in the room. Mm-hmm. What was the product pain and inspiration that you felt that it took some years before ultimately founding Twilio to pursue it, but what were some of the pains that you felt firsthand as a developer where, to your point, you did feel the passion about because you'd seen it in the voice of the user as well?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? Well, let me finish the story, and then I'll get to that, right? So I went on from StubHub, and I was having lunch one day with a guy, Kevin O'Connor. He was one of the first investors in my first company. He was the founder of DoubleClick. And I'm having lunch with Kevin. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't know, this StubHub thing, but I don't really know about it." And he said, "All right, why don't we start another company?" And I said, "Well, okay, doing what?" He said, "Well, why don't you come out to my summer home in the Hamptons, and we'll brainstorm a bunch of ideas." And so we did that. Went out to the summer home in the Hamptons. Matt came with, and we brainstormed. We brainstormed 1,000 business ideas. About 100 of them were probably decent. We wrote like 30 business plans. And believe it or not, of all the things that we could have started at that point in time, we were talking about, Waze was basically one of our ideas. Tile, the thing, was one of our ideas.
Location network, yep.
We had a bunch of really interesting ideas. The thing that we decided to start was a bricks and mortar retailer for extreme sporting goods.
Because of your hardcore extreme
Because
sports
I'm a
passion.
hardcore,
Naturally.
badass surfer, right? Sorry, my center of gravity is not inclined for me to be on anything that needs balance. But it was like we identified it. We're like, it's a big business. It's a large market. It's growing 30% year over year. There's like the retail market is completely fragmented. And so we were like, all right, it's a great business opportunity. And we moved out to LA and we opened our prototype store. And guess what happened? I realized I made the same mistake again. Right? I was like starting this business that I wasn't passionate about. And it's not even that I wasn't passionate about it, because anybody in here is like a skater?
Couple.
Yeah, a couple, right? So we made the whole store skatable. We wanted it to be like experiential. We wanted kids to skate and everything in the store. And so my role in this thing was being the tech person. Like I built an entire point of sale system and shipping and back house, automated order replenishment. Like I was like going to town building cool technology to run a retailer. And so I'm sitting in the back room of a skate shop programming. And like dozens of like 12-year-old skate rat kids are grinding every surface in the store, and all you heard all day was like the decks like slamming on the ground, and I like couldn't concentrate at all. And I came to hate our customers.
This rebound relationship was hard after the dot-com crash.
Yeah, right. And I was just like, this is bad. Sorry, Matt. Matt's here somewhere. He's my co-founder in this. And I was like, this is bad. Like, I hate our customers. I hate our product. I hate coming to work every day. Like, this is not what an entrepreneur should do. Like, you gotta love the product you're building and the customer you're serving, because that's what gets you through the hard times. And so I went to actually just change of pace totally. I went to Amazon, was one of the first product managers at AWS, doing some neat stuff there, but ultimately it was like, I'm an entrepreneur, I want to build something again. And when I left Amazon, I thought about a bunch of different product ideas, stuff that I'd be passionate about, and I had this realization that at every single one of my previous companies, first of all, we were using software. Like, because I was a software developer, like kind of at the core of every single one of these companies was we were building software to, continually ship, continually iterate, build a better customer experience every day. Like, that's the superpower of software, is your ability to continuously iterate your way towards the perfect customer experience. But the second thing that I realized that from every one of those companies was that at one point or another, we had needed communications to build a great customer experience. So I'll give you an example. At StubHub, we identified the need. We said, well, we need to let you buy a ticket online just, maybe an hour before the event and deliver that ticket to you so you can go in. We can't shut off sales, 3 days before when, I can mail it to you, because most of the ticket sales are actually done on the street corner in the hour before the event. And so we said, all right, how are we going to do ticket fulfillment, from a seller to a buyer just in time for an event? We came up with this idea. We're like, okay, well, someone buys it on the website. The server is going to automatically make a phone call to the seller, say, hey, seller, guess what? Your ticket's sold. Congratulations. We're sending a courier to pick it up from you. Then we dialed down a list of couriers that we worked with in that city until we found one who could do the job. Then we dial the buyer and say, hey, buyer, Courier Joe is showing up in 5 minutes at this street corner outside the stadium. Make sure you're there. So this whole workflow planned out. But then we said, like, well, we're software developers. What do we know about making a phone ring is magical. So we call up the communications industry, Cisco's and carriers and people like that. We said, how are we supposed to build this idea we have? And the answer was always the same. It was like, oh, yeah, we can help you with that. Like, first you're going to wire up all this copper wires to the data center. Then you're going to rack up a bunch of carrier gear. And then you're going to bring in our professional services to come and integrate this whole stack and bang it into submission to get it to do this thing that it was never designed to do. But we're pretty sure we can make it work. And it's going to cost you millions of dollars, and it's going to take us 24 months to implement. Sign here. And every time I was like, wait a minute. First of all, I don't have millions of dollars to spend on this one part of our customer experience. But two, I'm like, wait, 2 years? Right? Our progress is measured in sprints, every 2 weeks. Right? We're shipping a major new thing. And the whole idea that you would wait 2 years to find out if this was of value to my customers was insane. Because that's not how software works. Software is iterative. And after I had that experience 3 companies in a row, I kind of realized the world of communications is about the polar opposite from the world of software, which kind of makes sense, right? Because the world of communications for the last 150 years, they've been digging trenches in the ground and laying down wires and launching satellites and spending $50 billion on spectrum. These are high risk, high reward activities. So you're very careful, you're plotting, you're slow. But software is the opposite, right? We're always iterating. We can always change it. We can always make it better. And so we ship fast, and we are always iterating. And so we started Twilio to solve this problem of bringing communications into the era of software and making it a first-class citizen in the tool belt of every developer in the world, so that when you run into these use cases where communications can help you build a better company, you now say, aha, I know how to do that. It's Twilio. And a few hours later, you've implemented that use case, because that's the spirit of software.
So not only have you innovated on the product delivery method, but also the business model behind it. And I think it's probably not a coincidence that being at AWS in the early days, you saw some of their evolution of the business model, some of their early experimentation. And for the audience here in the room, that probably the vast majority of the folks here have headed down a path. They've got that moment of product inspiration. They have that early customer persona. They have that early product idea. but may not have the business model refinement, which in Twilio's case, you could argue is still ongoing, but certainly took several years and went through meaningful experimentation. Can you talk a little bit about the business model evolution and the consumption pricing in a lot of the API economy markets in particular, but also some of the learnings through that, and perhaps what you could share to the founders here who have the early product kernel worked through, but haven't yet had their business model epiphany?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for us, I mean, we haven't changed our business model tremendously through the years. We've been scaling up a pretty similar business model since the earliest days. But for us, it was about trying to align the pricing and the business value to the audience. And for developers, we wanted to remove friction. That was our number one goal, because friction is the thing that inhibits experimentation. And experimentation is the prerequisite to innovation. And so anything you can do to remove friction that encourages innovation will lead to new customers and new revenue. And so that was the way we approached it. Although people often ask, like, is that the right way? And I don't think that's the answer for every market, right? It's not always that removing friction is the best approach. It's not always that, for example, a self-service, for us, developer-led approach, which is, very much in vogue, both developers, but also just self-service, right? The idea that with multi-tenancy in technology, you can allow people to buy things themselves. I don't think that is always the answer. And I think as developers, I don't know how many people in the audience are developers or product people. I mean, for developers.
Raise your hand if you're a product-led founder, team member, or developer, if you've coded before. Okay, so maybe a third of the audience.
So it's interesting. To developers, we always assume that nobody wants to talk to sales, and you want to get started by just clicking around, and you never want to interact with another human being. And this is a fallacy that I think developers fall into, and I am totally guilty of this. But I think just like you would look at certain other companies and the way they deal with things and say, well, you don't understand developers at all. Well, us developers, we don't understand a whole lot of the world either. Right? There are people out there who would love to talk to somebody and to hear what best way there is to implement something. And so there's a go-to-market approach that has got to be right for your product. And the features of your product, your go-to-market, your sales and marketing plan, and these things have to jive together. And for us, they did. Because our audience was developers. We removed friction. We made it self-service. We published the pricing, and that worked for that audience. But if your customer is an audience who would rather be more engaged, more consultative, talk to somebody, and they're willing to pay for that, then great. That's what you should do. But the key thing is understanding the fit between your audience and your go-to-market, right? And one thing I'll point out, this is where companies get into trouble, right? Is where you have a high-touch consultative sales process and then a low-priced product, right? So you're underwater because your sales and marketing costs too high.
The unit economics never work out. And it's interesting on that point. Twilio, Atlassian, and a number of the sort of flag bearers for this developer economy have surprised Wall Street to the positive in terms of the low percentage of sales and marketing spend per dollar of revenue. And that is truly one of the eye-opening gifts of the developer economy for the new analyst community as they're seeing the power of these models. And I suspect many of the audience members here have chosen that particular model, although to your point, there's no single right answer as they walk down this path. On the product point specifically, people probably know of Twilio from those early products, the voice and the SMS, but can you give them a sense of how you've walked down this product journey and what are the products that you've layered in and why, and kind of how have you dealt with this constant tension of focus versus developers with this endless desire for more capabilities?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? So a lot of people advising you as startups and as founders will give you this advice, right? That you need to focus, right? You ruthlessly say no to your job is to say no a lot, and you're successful as a CEO based on how many times you say no. And I actually think that's bad advice, personally. And at Twilio, we have very early, frequently, branched out into new product areas. And to me, there's, as always, Jeff Bezos articulated this so well in his annual letter to shareholders this year. He said something about how, your success, if you're playing baseball, your success is how many at-bats you can get, because every at-bat is an opportunity to hit a home run, right? And so as a business leader, your goal is to create more at-bats for yourself, right? But the difference, and that's like, okay, that's good advice. And then he nails it out of the park. Actually not mixed analogy, but no pun intended. He says, it's not just at-bats, but in baseball, the outcome is constrained because the absolute best you can do in baseball if you hit a home run is get 4 runs. Bases loaded, grand slam. In business, you're unconstrained. You can hit a home run that gets you 10 billion points, right? If you build the right product and execute, right? So it's like, so why wouldn't you keep going for more and more and more at-bats, right? Because you're unconstrained in how much you can win if you actually hit a home run. And it doesn't matter how many times you strike out, right? And this is sort of the essence of the lean startup concept as well. Like Eric Ries will tell you, right? You need to go, you need to try, because that's the only way you're going to ultimately find an audience, find product market fit, find success. And if you think about that concept, like I'm a big believer in that. So we started with voice, and like voice is a $1 billion market. And we started with voice, and I think when we were doing probably about, I don't know, I'm gonna guess here, 100K of MRR, so maybe let's just say $1 million of ARR, we launched our second product, SMS. Right, so a lot of people would have said, why are you launching a second product? Like your first one has a huge amount of headroom in as far as that market goes. So well, because our customers also want SMS, and we think there's demand for it. And so with literally, we were a company of 5 people, and a first product that was growing very nicely, we launched our second product. And that product then started growing very nicely. And now we've launched third, fourth, fifth. We now have 15 different product lines. And 12 of those we've launched in the last 18 months. And it's actually very interesting because your organization, I find, will try to find a lot of reasons to not do all these things. Because a lot of people are trained to believe focus, 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 and all this sort of stuff. And hey, what about that thing we did 2 years ago? It didn't work out. I don't know about this other one, right? And so you really have to keep, I find you keep articulating, here's why we're here. There isn't one opportunity. There are many opportunities. And so I view my job, in the early days, you have to build the machine that makes money. And then once you figure that out, I viewed my job as trying to figure out, okay, I'm not building a product anymore, I'm building a company. And my job is to build the machine that builds machines. And so keep investing in not just the ability of the company to innovate, but also the desire, right? The hunger, but also the belief that this is the only way to build a large, meaningful business is to continually reinvent yourself. And look, our company does voice. People don't make phone calls anymore. Our company does SMS. Well, a lot of this is in Messenger now. So we're in a market that, while it's enormous, is in a great state of flux. And you can look at that as a threat, right? And a lot of my early venture capital meetings, people say, oh, I don't use my phone anymore. Okay, great. It's only a $1 trillion market. Maybe it's shrinking by 30%. You're right, I should go home, right? So you can look at it as a threat, or if you're Twilio, we look at it as an opportunity. An enormous industry in a once-in-a-lifetime state of transition from its legacy in hardware to its future in software. And we're going to invest, right? And we're going to take a piece of that future that we want to power. And so that's the sort of spirit that you want to instill in your teams, to see opportunities everywhere. And sure, you got to make some hard decisions about where to focus. So I shouldn't use that word because I just told you not to use that word. Where to put your investments.
Sure, you're
right?
Always dealing with resource allocation.
You always have to resource allocate because you're never unconstrained. I mean, even if you're, I don't know, Apple, right? You've got resource constraints. But the question is, what processes do you use to make those decisions, and how big of investments do you make? And to me, it's always about make a lot of small investments, and when the ones work, you double down on them. I don't know if, speaking of small investments and doubling down, because actually it's easy to make a lot of small investments, and then it's easy to make the mistake of not doubling down on the ones that are working. We've made that mistake before. There was one point where we were investing like in a new product line, and someone pointed out like, hey, like SMS, this thing that's growing like a weed and is like really popular and like everyone uses, we only have one engineer on it. And they're like, why are we putting more engineers on this new thing? We're like, that's probably a pretty good point, right? So you really have to be pretty ruthless about making good decisions. Sorry, that was a long time ago. That was like 2010 or something.
There's at least 6 engineers on SMS now, Jeff.
It was at least 2. And so it's like, that resource allocation process is actually one of the most critical things that you develop as a CEO as your company grows, because that really is the process whereby you figure out if you're a company that's going to capture opportunities, whether you're going to believe that innovation is at your core, and whether or not you are going to disrupt yourself when that time comes, right? And that process of where do you put your investments is what it all comes down to.
So we're going to come back to a lot of the successes, but share with us some strikeout moments, examples of either early days near-death experiences when the company only had a product or two, or some of these 15-plus attempts that maybe turned out to be cul-de-sacs and you had to kill them.
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of people who also there's other weird wisdoms. What is wisdom? Someone tweeted it once, and now it's called wisdom. I don't really know. I don't believe a lot of these, but there's people who say for every product or new feature you add, you have to kill an old feature. Well, that's a stupid rule. Who would make that up, right? Obviously, there's no one-size-fits-all for every business. So the interesting thing about our business is, as a set of developer APIs, developer trust is the most important thing in our business. We have never killed an API.
Yeah. As a developer, round of applause for that.
Right? And there's stuff that we'd love to say, there aren't a lot of people using that thing. Well, it'd be nice if we could get rid of it, but no. We know. Once we put it out there, we got to live with it. It's like having a kid. And
you're stuck with it.
Yeah, you're stuck with it, right? And that's just the nature of our business, and we take that trust incredibly important. So we've never killed anything, but I'll say, there's always an interesting story. We started the company in the very beginning of 2008. We built a prototype. Where all of Twilio was just running on one EC2 instance, right? But that's all you need to get customer validation. So we built a very early version of it, and we started giving it out to some developers who are friends of ours and said, hey, play with this thing. Let us know what you think. Do you like it? We're getting great feedback. Some of these early customers built products that were actually really interesting. Some of them even got blogged about, and we're starting to scale. And we're no, don't scale anything on this thing yet. So we were feeling really good about this product. And then I went out to raise money in the summer of 2008. And so 2 things happened. First of all, I went out. I was okay, we got this product. It's for developers. It's like the Hudsucker proxy. Do you know anyone know the Hudsucker proxy? Anyone? Where he's got the hula hoop, he's selling the hula hoop, and he's for kids. And it was so I was out there being for developers. And I got all these, blank stares, and I don't understand. Developers aren't a market. Developers aren't, they don't buy things. They don't have the checkbook. CIOs, they have the checkbook, right? And then other people are saying, don't build something for developers. Build an application. Build a SaaS product. Build a PBX in the cloud. And then if you're successful many years later, why don't you go add an API? Because APIs only accompany applications. This worked out well for Facebook. Why don't you go do that? And we spent that whole summer fundraising getting basically that answer. We had a few people who were interested, and then a funny thing happened. The whole financial world melted down. And I remember, I walked out of one prominent seed stage venture capitalist on the day Lehman Brothers collapsed. Right? And it was nobody's funding anything. I was in some meetings with venture capitalists, and they were literally on their BlackBerries the whole meeting. Actively annoyed that I was taking them away from dealing with whatever crisis.
Their world was melting down.
Yeah, whatever company they're on the board of, which is about to go out of business. I was annoying them by sitting there, right? And that was the fundraising environment. I spent the whole summer fundraising, and I didn't raise a single dollar. The company still did not have a bank account. Right, we had to put in there, when you walk into a bank to open a bank account, you have to give a check to open the, so we don't have a bank account. And so we actually thought about it. We're well, wait a minute, is this a bad idea? Should we be, there's a lot of smart people who told us it's a bad idea. Right? There's a lot of people who presumably do a lot of pattern matching, right, venture capitalists. Right? And so we thought about it, and then the founders, we kind of looked at each other and we said, well, you know what, the people who really matter here are our customers, and customers are telling us we're onto something. They're building it. They're enjoying it. They're starting to pay us even. So we kept on. And we launched the product, and immediately people started paying us. Strangers, like people we didn't even know, right? I remember we launched, and we were driving down, all three of us were driving down the freeway. We were going to some event. We were driving down the 101 from San Francisco to Palo Alto, and my co-founder's in the back seat with like our intranet open. He's like, oh my God, people are paying us, right?
And some big people, by the way, over time.
And that was essentially, what you needed, right? Serve your customers. And if you have happy customers and they're paying you, like that's what you need. You don't need to convince the investors. You need to convince the customers. And the customers will, their behaviors will convince the investors. And so we did that. And I remember shortly thereafter, a few weeks after we launched, I actually got married. And my wife and I returned all the wedding gifts to buy more runway for ourselves, so we could go longer without having to go get a job. And it turns out the best ROI investment I've made. And then sure enough, after a few months, we had enough customer traction, enough customer data points to go back to many of those investors, and we're able to raise that round.
And then building up.
Can I give a piece of advice, by the way?
Please do.
As an entrepreneur, I've always found that one of the best things you can do is tell people what you're going to do and then go do it. Right? That's just kind of basic stuff, right? But multiple times in my career, I found that that's the best way to get what you want as an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs are a lot of hopes and dreams, and it's hard for the stakeholders that you need to get on board, whether they're investors or customers or anyone else, to figure out if you're actually for real, right? And the way you do that is by delivering. And so I remember I was talking to Mitch Kapor in the summer of 2008. I don't know if any of you know Mitch. He's the founder of Lotus, Lotus 123. Like put a desktop on every, put a computer on every desktop, basically, because he's like the father of the personal computer, basically. And he was actually really digging the idea for Twilio. He thought this was really cool. But he was like, I don't think that you have the know-how to reach the developers of the world, because there's no go-to-market. We're 3 developers founded the company. So he's like, I think it's really cool. You're solving your own problem, but I don't know that you know how to do a go-to-market. And I was probably like, a go to what? No. And he said, so I'm going to pass at this time. And I said, who would you get on the team who knows whatever this go-to thing you're talking about? And he said, all right, let me think a little bit. Who would I refer to? He said, I know, Dave McClure. And I said, okay, great. Could you make an introduction to Dave McClure for me, please? He said, okay. He made an introduction to Dave McClure. He didn't know it at the time. This is the 4th introduction to Dave I'd gotten. Dave had not returned to my previous 3. I was like, all right, I'll try it again. I eventually did reach Dave. I pitched him on Twilio. He thought it was a cool idea. And I got him on board as an advisor. And then right around a little while later, he started working at Founders Fund, and he wrote a check from Founders Fund to actually kick off our seed round. He was the first investor. And I went back to Mitch. I said, hey, Mitch, last time we met, you said that I should get Dave McClure to help with the go-to-market. And I literally brought Dave to the meeting. I said, so here's Dave McClure. He's an advisor to the company, and he just put in $200K of Founders Fund's money. Are you in? And Mitch said, yeah. Right? So it's just like follow through, like do what you say you're going to do. And that's the best way to get people on board.
So let's come to the other end of the extreme and add a few zeros to that on the fundraising discussion specifically. There's been a lot of talk in Silicon Valley that going public isn't cool, or why should private unicorns rush the IPO process, and many have even questioned why go public at all if there's liquidity in private markets. Twilio chose in a bumpy climate to be one of the few, not only to test the market, but to set a high watermark for the year in terms of what an IPO can look like. Why did you choose to do it? And how should founders think about that decision process in the coming years, hopefully, as they may face that same decision tree?
Yeah, to me, the decision was about building trust with our customers and with the market. Because I just believe in the cloud, regardless of if you're a developer platform or you're a SaaS product or whatever you are, the number one thing that you're selling is trust. Right? You're selling trust to like a business that you're asking to buy your product. Trust that we're going to run this part of your business better than you can run it yourself, better than some other vendor out there. Trust us. And customers are giving up control under the belief that it will be a better outcome for them. That's what the cloud is about. And so the number one thing any company in the cloud is selling is trust. And for me, when, the whole story was changing around unicorns, there's a while and it was like, unicorns, oh my God, it's so amazing, right? And then it was like, wait, these unicorns suck, right? And it's like, because you're valued at $1 billion, you must be a horrible company. And I was like, this is the dumbest storyline ever, right? Just because I'm valued at $1 billion means I'm amazing. Just because I'm valued, now it's like I'm valued at $1 billion, I must be a bad business. You're like, this broad storyline that's supposed to apply equally to like however 100 companies that happen to have been valued at this arbitrary mark that the press decided was important. And I'm like, this is really bad, and I don't want this to ever impact our business. Like, I don't want some, big enterprise who are, is in our, we're selling to say, yeah, you know what, but you're a unicorn. I don't know about that, right? And I was just like, I want to stand on my own. I want people to measure my business based on its strengths and its merits. And so that, to me, like when that whole unicorn thing was just kind of going crazy, I was like, you know what? Let's just get out of the pack. Let's just have our business be evaluated on its own, because customers know, like everybody knows, customers know, employees know, whatever it is. Like if you're a public company, you have to be transparent, right? The details of your business are just laid bare. And so people can make their own decision, right? And to me, that is great for building trust, right? And the other thing is that people know that a public company is just a better run company. You have to be, because you've got these, really important stakeholders. And so you're a better run company, you're transparent, they can see your balance sheet, they can see everything about your company. And to me, that was just what I wanted to do to take the company to the next level, to continue building trust with customers, and use the public market as the platform for building the next stage of the company. And one of the things people often say, I literally, and this is bizarre to me, like after the IPO, somebody, in tech, like in the know of like how the world works, you'd think, said to me like, oh, well, like congrats on your exit. What are you going to do next? And I said, I don't know, run a public company. I'm like, this is just the stage for the next growth that we're going to encounter. And you look at the value creation that's occurred at companies like Salesforce and Amazon. And you look back to the day of the IPO, you're like, it's nothing compared to the companies they built.
Amazon went public at 600, 800 million, something in that range?
Yeah, it's 600 million market cap,
yeah.
Right? And so you look at the value creation that can occur with the public, public stance as your new stage, like it's amazing. And that's what made me really want to do it.
Excellent. So there's some negatives to the growth, and probably the growth that's ahead for many folks here, including people elements where you probably can't interview every employee that Twilio hires, at least to depth you used to, et cetera. But one of the things that shocks me is how consistent the Twilio culture has been throughout this cycle. And that's something that I know you are a big believer in, that the founders and early execs absolutely can set and can drive to at least preserve the hiring norms and the a lot of the ethos and ethics that you want to instill. Can you talk a little bit about the role of company values, and then specifically, I think the notion of drawing the owl in the Twilio sense may be relevant to groups here, and then also frugality is one of your corporate values and virtues that jumps out in many ways in contrast to the current culture of, throw the masseuse and the chef and the drivers at engineers, so hopefully they'll only quit in 18 months instead of 16 months.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think giving a lot of thought to your values and the culture that your values create is a not a very well understood process. And for the amount of time entrepreneurs talk about culture, it's not a very well articulated process of how you actually influence such a thing. And I find that really interesting. And you find a lot of people that talk about culture, and even like, what's the difference between culture and values? Right? And I think that values are written words that define how you believe your employees should make decisions. And then your culture is how people actually interpret and live those values. And they're not the same. A whole lot of companies have values that are completely orthogonal to the behavior of their employees, right? And so you've got these two sets of things that one, you can actively control your values. As the founder, as the CEO, you have the opportunity to write those. And it's amazing, a lot of founders actually don't take that opportunity to put them down on paper. And we, it took us a while. We did it when we were about 75 people, which I think is a decent size. I think I waited a little too long. I think if you try to do it too early, like when you're 3 people, it's a little like a teenager. You don't quite know yourself yet. It's just awkward, and like you go through periods where maybe I'm goth, no, maybe I'm emo, and maybe and as a company that's too small, like you have a little bit of that too, like you don't really know who you are yet, but like you have to figure it out pretty quickly, or else you risk losing control of it. And so, by the time you're a few dozen people, you should probably have figured out where you want to go, and put it down in words, black and white, because what you're doing is you're articulating the things about your company that you like and you want to continue to exist as you scale. You cannot make up words. That is false. It wouldn't be true. You can't just put it in writing and assume it's going to be true. But you can take things that are already there and call them out by name and say, these are handles we want to hold on to and not let go of as we grow. So it's important that you articulate those values. But then the question comes, how do you live those values? And my best piece of advice on that is it's your job as the founders and the CEOs to first and foremost live the values yourself. And if you aren't setting that example, you should not expect your company to live them either. And that's a really important thing. So we did our, one of my favorite cultural moments in that, like setting the example. I was so proud of myself for this one. It was like 4 years ago. We were having our big company all hands to kick off the year, like in January. And we had an award called the Owl Award. Draw the owl is one of our values. It comes from that old internet meme. How many of you know how to draw an owl? It's like an old internet meme. How to draw an owl. Step 1, draw some circles. And it's got the like sketch of the head and the body circle. Step 2, draw the rest of the fucking owl. And it's got like a fully drawn like owl, and it's just like, that's how you draw an owl. And this meme like went around our office a lot in the early days. Like someone would like ask a question, like they'd email the whole hey, does anybody know how to do this? And like someone would reply with just that picture. And we were like, why is this so funny? Why will this meme not die inside of Twilio? And the answer was, this is kind of what it means to be a startup. Like no one here is going to give us the instruction book about how to get to there. Like we have to figure it out. And that's what's exciting about this job, right? We're going to start with a few circles, like some basic assumptions, and then we just have to figure out how the rest works. So that's one of our core values, draw the owl. Another one of our core values is be frugal, right? The money that we have, we need to spend on things our customers value. That's how we succeed as a business. But if you're spending money on things that aren't of value to your customers and are not furthering your mission, well, then you're not spending your money right. And so at this one all hands, I wanted to give an award to the employees, and I had I researched how to like make like award like trophies, and they were like, I wanted to do something on like Shapeways and like make a nice owl, but it was like gonna be a lot of money, and I had a 3D printer, so I just printed them myself in my house, and I had this 3D printer running 24/7 for like 2 weeks. And like the first one I did was like really big and nice. I'm like, this is awesome. And I looked at my watch and I was like, that took 24 hours to print. And I did the math. I'm like, there's no way I won't be done for our all hands in 2 weeks. And so I like made it half as big and did 2 at a time. And I was like, oh, I'm still not gonna be. I ended up doing like 8 up. So they're all different sizes by the time I did it. But I told the company about the story about how these trophies, I like made them myself. And I thought what was really cool about it was that it was like I was exemplifying the values. Draw the owl. Like I just figured this out. And I'd never actually used a 3D printer before. And then be frugal. Like I saved about $5,000 by doing this. And like all these employees now had this like kind of shitty owl. But the CEO made it himself. And it's like, that's kind of cool, right? I think. and it was just like one of these moments where it like felt like I was really tying the values together in a public way. And I think like it's those moments you can create that demonstrate your commitment to the values that you put on paper are the things that make those values real. Because people will remember those.
And I want to extend that with the last question. I think it's appropriate to end on this, which is one of the awards that I know you're most proud of this year that the company won was around corporate philanthropy. And the idea that you can integrate philanthropy as part of the company, as part of the economics of the company, but also as part of the values. Can you give just a little snapshot, not necessarily around the particular model, but why you chose to integrate it when still sitting as a private company and how that rolls forward?
Yeah, and this is, I think, an important thing to think about, especially as we build companies and we want to keep employees engaged. The adding another layer of meaning to the work that you do together is important. I think it's especially important to younger employees, like millennials, because there's a lot of opportunities to like make money, especially in Silicon Valley. Like, yeah, a lot of smart people. And there's plenty of places, like every building they walk past on their way to work in the morning is another place that I'm sure would happily hire any of your employees and probably pay them 20 grand more, right? So the reason why people keep walking into your front door is a commitment to the mission and the enjoyment of their coworkers. And so to me, adding another layer of meaning to the business is really important. And we discovered how we were going to do that pretty early on. Because as a platform business, we never know the use cases that people are going to have for Twilio. Right? We started Twilio, we said, we know a few of the things that we think we would build, but we don't even know half of it. Right? And that's certainly true. And one of the areas where this is extremely pronounced is in the world of nonprofits and social good. Right? Turns out there are all these use cases for communications in the world of social good. Because so many of society's problems stem from the lack of communications or can be fixed by the right communication with the right person at the right time. And like, I never would have guessed that, but all these nonprofits coming up with these use cases and approaching us saying, hey, Twilio, can you help us build this thing? We're trying to do disaster response and mobilize volunteers. We're trying to get, medicine shipments to, villages in faraway places, and we're trying to coordinate, and communications can help us achieve all these things. We said, wow, that's really cool. Our product can actually change the outcomes in these really critical times of need for people in society. Like, we're all in. Like, how can we do that? And we use this as the impetus to start Twilio.org to make it clear to the nonprofits of the world that we want to work with you. And that not only are we like willing to like help you, it's actually one of our main goals. Like, we want to make this a part of our company and make it a part of our ethos of why we exist. And then so we started Twilio.org, and a couple of years ago, or last year, we committed 1% of the equity of the company before the IPO to sustainably fund Twilio.org, to make sure that this was a priority and to send a clear message to our employees, to our investors, to everybody out there that this was an important part of our company and that we were committed. It's not just something you do when it's convenient, right? It's not just part of a marketing budget, which is where it started inside of Twilio. And in a lot of companies, it's like a marketing budget. But I didn't want it to be just a marketing budget item. I wanted it to be a sustainable and core part of our mission. So I did two things. We did the 1% equity pledge, which, by the way, I want to really call out Byron and the rest of our board for supporting that. Because a lot of people talk about taking the 1% pledge when you start the company, which I think you should do. But other people may get the message that if you didn't do it at the time you founded the company, you're out of luck. And I want to let you know, Twilio took the 1% pledge after we'd raised $250 million of capital. And our investors agreed to get diluted by the 1% because they believe we're building a better company. And ultimately, it'll be a good outcome for them. And I'm not a fool. I understand that your goal is to make a return on your investment. But you need to convince your investors, if you have them, that this is actually how they're going to make a greater return on their investment. And I believe that is absolutely true. I mean, we announced earlier this year that Salesforce is powering Lightning Voice inside of the Sales Cloud. So salespeople can, when they're logged into Salesforce, make all their sales calls right directly in the web browser. That's powered by Twilio. That is because we took the 1% pledge. Because Benioff was like, that's really cool. What's this company, Twilio? And then he sent it to his team saying, hey, we should use Twilio to power this new idea, right? It was like this serendipity comes about when you invest in doing the right thing. I firmly believe that. Whether it's your employees being more engaged, whether it's opportunities with new customers, all sorts of things come about because of that. And so it's just, this has been a part of building Twilio, and I'm so happy that we've done this. And I can't imagine why you wouldn't do it, why you wouldn't use some parts of the energy that you're putting towards building a company to try to have this extra layer of meaning on top of all that energy as an amplifier.
I think that's worthy of a round of applause for that.
And seriously, I am not aware of any other investors in Silicon Valley who've agreed to get diluted by taking the 1% pledge. And so a round of applause for Byron and the rest of my board in absentia.
Thank you. So we've been given a time extension if there are 2 audience questions, so I'll field those in a minute. But I do want to reiterate Jeff's comments there in terms of the leadership on both fronts, certainly as from the entrepreneurial side, but also on the corporate philanthropy side, and would encourage folks to think about how that can be a win-win for defining the company culture and the business mission, because they are complementary. So why don't we start over here with the first question.
Hey, Jeff. Happy customer, number 1. Number 2.
Awesome. Thank you for your business.
Yeah, of course. Soon to be shareholder. I need to buy some stock. Real question today is probably a non-traditional question you get asked at a conference like this. How has your process or routine changed as a leader in the company from the early days through today? Whether that's your morning routines, your evening routines, even stuff you do outside of the company to kind of keep that balance?
Yeah, so I usually wake up around 3 a.m. I start with an exercise regimen, and I drink the blood of a live bat. No, I'm still a developer at heart. Like, I love sleeping as long as I can. I'd say the thing that's important about how your job changes as you grow is that you need to be adaptable. And there isn't even one answer, because what I found is that my job as a CEO changes about every 6 months or so. As the company is growing. And you know that you need to change your approach to doing the job, because the things that you used to do to run the company kind of stopped working. Like, things just get harder. Like, it's not like things you used to say something to some person and it would get done, or and then suddenly things stopped working that way. And you can get really frustrated. And what you need to realize is that the things that I did when the company was 10 people, yeah, they're not working when the company is 30 people. Why is that? Oh, okay, well, I don't know everybody as well. I don't meet with everybody on practically a daily basis anymore, right? And so there's different ways in which you need to manage. And the 30-person company is going to work differently than the 100-person, which is different from the 200, from the 500, from the 1,000. And the key thing, I think, for you is just to remember that. The company needs you to lead it. And those needs change as the company changes. And the biggest thing I found is that as the company changes in size, the way you go about doing your job has to adjust for the fact that you have more indirect influence in what happens at the company as it gets bigger. And that's where things when you realize you're no longer interviewing every person yourself, you need to clearly articulate, what are we looking for in people and the values, right? Or else you have no idea who people are going to hire, right? And so that's an indirect way of managing the company. And you need to start thinking about those kinds of things and start thinking about how do I give people the toolkit to make good decisions instead of being there in every decision? And that's one of the biggest changes you go through. When you realize that there's decisions being made all the time that you don't even know. It's not that you're not a part of making the decision. You don't even know that decision got made. Apparently somebody needed to I don't know, create pricing or a new marketing page, whatever it was. I didn't even know we needed that marketing page, let alone the words that were on it, let alone whether I like the words, whatever it is, right? And so what you need to do is just create this system for people to make good decisions. And that's the biggest change that happens, because in the earliest days, you don't need a system, you just need to make good decisions.
All righty, one more, and then we'll let you hop into the cocktail session, please.
Okay, thanks. I enjoyed your talk, Jeff.
You are preventing cocktails, so it's got to be a great question.
It's going to be quick. It's going to be incisive. So my company Outbound sends messages based on what people do inside our product. And about a third of our customers use Twilio, actually, so we integrate. And one of the things I find is that
Awesome. Thank you for the business.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you for, we couldn't do it without you. We sit on top of you. So it's a good partnership. So we find ourselves pulled, product teams want to use our product, marketing teams want to use our product, and developers want to use our product. And there's lots of use cases, like you have described for Twilio. And we're multi-channel, so we're SMS plus other channels. And I find that it's really hard to make those decisions between different customers. And you guys are anchored on developers. When did you anchor and why?
Well, we've been anchored on developers really since day one, because we're a company founded by developers for developers. So our struggle isn't as much with the customer persona, because we have been very focused on the developer, but there's still a lot that you need to think about, for our business, about use cases. Because if you wait for developers to discover every use case for Twilio on their own, it's that's obviously a very inefficient way to build market share. And the way we think about it is we want to move the workloads of communication from their legacy onto Twilio, and we want to make sure that the new workloads of communication are invented on Twilio. And so our job is to kind of arm the developers of the world, but also tell the story of how you can use Twilio. And that ends up being a marketing problem, a sales problem, and also a product problem. And I think every company solves it differently, but it's a little easier for us because we still generally start with the developer, but it doesn't have to be that way. Like, you can start with different buyers of your product, but I think what you need to do is make sure that you're talking to each of them in the right way for that audience, right? But then make sure that you drop them into a product that's appropriate for that. So there's a very interesting thing. Like, we get a lot of people who aren't developers who for some reason sign up for Twilio. Right? And then they write into support, they're saying, this is so confusing. And the organization is always saying well, hey, what are we going to do? Our product's confusing. Right? It's a natural thing. If you're a support agent, you keep getting these tickets, right? And, for better or worse, my answer is often well, we're not going to do anything. They're not our customer. And I always find it's very interesting, but it's both it's not a bug, but it's an opportunity. Right? And so I think for us, for example, there have been some polls to say, hey, how do we fix Twilio so someone who doesn't know how to code doesn't write into that ticket that say, I'm really confused. And I'm like, that's not a fixing Twilio problem. Right? But it is an opportunity to say, but there are a lot of people out there who for some reason are signing up for Twilio. Why is that? Let's not figure out how to get those people to be successful using a developer product, but let's ask them, what's your problem?
Yep.
Right? And maybe Twilio can be a company that solves that problem, depending on what that problem is.
Yeah, give them a path.
Yeah, and so it's I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the way I've looked at it, which is just trying to make sure that you've got an intentional fit and clearly articulated to the organization of here are these different people, and here's what they need from us, and then deciding okay, are we going to serve that customer or not? And my inclination is if you've got people coming to you, for you it's sales, marketing, developers, and the hardest part is to get people to come to you. Right? If you got them there, ask them the questions to figure out how you serve them, then you got to make smart resourcing decisions on how much resources to put towards each one of those three problems, let's say. But it's a neat opportunity to get to serve multiple customers because you get to ask, why are you here? How can I help you?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Another round of applause, please, for Jeff.
Thank you all. Best of luck with everything.
Jeff, that was great.